Maya Chen couldn't believe she was finally holding the keys to her own place. At 23, most of her friends were still renting apartments or living with their parents. But here she was, standing in front of a cute little townhouse in Riverside. Meadows about to start her first real chapter as a homeowner. The place wasn't huge or fancy, just a 2-bedroom townhouse with a small front yard and a driveway that fit one car. But it was hers. After 4 years of grinding through college and landing a decent job as a software developer, she'd saved every penny she could. Her parents had helped a bit with the down payment, and now this little slice of the world belonged to her. Moving day was exhausting but exciting. Maya didn't have much furniture yet, just the essentials. A bed, a couch her aunt had given her, and boxes of clothes and kitchen stuff. She spent the first week getting settled, working from home during the day and unpacking at night. The neighborhood seemed quiet enough. People went to work in the morning and came home in the evening. A few neighbors waved when they saw her, but nobody really stopped to chat. That was fine with Maya. She'd always been a bit shy around new people anyway. What Maya didn't talk about much was her other life, the one that didn't involve computer screens and lines of code. 4 evenings a week, she drove 20 minutes to Master Lee's dojo, where she'd been training since she was 7 years old. Karate wasn't just a hobby for Maya, it was part of who she was. She'd earned her 3rd-degree black belt when she was 21, and now she helped teach the kids' classes on Saturday mornings. But she never brought it up in casual conversation. It wasn't that she was hiding it exactly. She just didn't think it was something people needed to know. Plus, she'd learned over the years that mentioning martial arts sometimes made people act weird around her, like they suddenly had to watch what they said or did. Everything was going smoothly until the 3rd week. Maya had worked late on a Friday, debugging some tricky code that had been driving her crazy all day. By the time she got home, it was almost 8 at night. She was tired, hungry, and just wanted to heat up some leftovers and crash on the couch. When she pulled into her driveway, she was so focused on getting inside that she didn't notice her car was sitting a few inches over the white line that separated her parking space from the next one. The next morning, she found a note tucked under her windshield wiper. It wasn't a friendly "hey neighbor" kind of note. The words were printed in all caps on HOA letterhead, and the tone was harsh. It said her vehicle was parked in violation of community standards, and that she needed to correct it immediately or face a fine. The note was signed by Richard Thornton, HOA president. Maya felt her stomach drop a little. She looked at her car and realized it was barely over the line, maybe 3 or 4 inches at most. It seemed like such a minor thing, hardly worth an angry note. But she didn't want trouble, especially not in her first month here. She moved her car right away, making sure it was perfectly centered in her space. She figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next few days, Maya started noticing a man watching her townhouse. He looked like he was in his late 50s, always dressed in khaki pants and a polo shirt, like he was heading to a golf course. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and he had this stern expression that never seemed to soften. She guessed this was Richard Thornton. One Tuesday evening, she put her trash bins out for Wednesday morning collection, just like everyone else on the street. The pickup was scheduled for 7 in the morning, but Maya's work meeting ran late on Wednesday, and she didn't get home until almost 5 in the afternoon. When she pulled up to her townhouse, there was another note taped to her front door. This one said her trash bins had remained on the curb for more than 2 hours after collection, which violated Section 4.7 of the HOA guidelines. There was a warning that repeated violations would result in a $50 fine. Maya felt frustrated now. She'd been in a meeting. Life happens. But again, she didn't want conflict. She read through the entire HOA rulebook that night, all 37 pages of it. The rules were incredibly detailed. They covered everything, from what color you could paint your front door to how tall your grass could grow, to what type of outdoor decorations were allowed. The following week, she got another letter. This one claimed her doormat was the wrong size. Apparently, doormats couldn't extend more than 18 inches from the front door. Hers was 20 inches. Maya stood there staring at her simple brown doormat, the one that just said "welcome" in plain letters, and felt completely confused. Who measures doormats? But the thing that really bothered her was how Richard spoke to the other residents versus how he spoke to her. She'd noticed it at the monthly HOA meeting she'd attended. When older homeowners asked questions or raised concerns, Richard was polite and understanding. But when Maya had asked a simple question about guest parking, he'd cut her off mid-sentence and made a comment about young people these days, not reading the community guidelines before buying property. A few other people in the room had looked uncomfortable, but nobody said anything. Maya felt her face get hot, but she stayed quiet. Master Lee had taught her long ago that responding to disrespect with anger only makes things worse. Control your emotions. Control the situation. Her elderly neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patricia Wong, caught Maya outside one evening while she was checking her mail. The older woman spoke quietly, almost like she was worried someone might hear. She told Maya that Richard had been the HOA president for 6 years and that he'd made life miserable for several families. 3 households had actually sold their homes and moved away just to escape his constant harassment. Maya thanked Mrs. Wong for the warning and went inside feeling troubled. She'd saved for years to buy this place. She wasn't about to let some bully drive her out. But she also knew that fighting with the HOA president probably wasn't smart. So she kept her head down, followed every rule she could find, and kept going to the dojo 4 nights a week. Training was her escape. When she was practicing kata or sparring with her fellow black belts, nothing else mattered. Not work stress, not HOA drama, nothing. Just her breath, her movement, and the discipline she'd spent 16 years building. What Richard Thornton didn't know, what nobody in Riverside Meadows knew, was that the quiet young woman in Unit 47 could handle herself better than most people could imagine. The harassment didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. Maya had been living in Riverside Meadows for about 2 months when she received a certified letter in the mail. Her heart sank when she saw the HOA return address. She signed for it and opened it right there in her living room. The letter stated that her window blinds were not in compliance with community standards. They needed to be a specific shade of white, and hers were apparently too cream-colored. Maya walked to her window and looked at the blinds. They looked white to her. Completely normal. Regular white blinds that had come with the townhouse when she bought it. The previous owners had lived here for 5 years, and apparently nobody had complained about the blinds then. She took a photo and compared it to the paint chip code listed in the HOA documents. Maybe there was a slight difference, but you'd need to be really looking for it to notice. The letter gave her 14 days to replace them or face a $200 fine. She felt angry for the first time since moving in. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. Richard was clearly targeting her and she had no idea why. Was it because she was young? Because she was quiet? And he thought she'd be an easy target? She didn't know. But it was getting ridiculous. Maya went to the hardware store that weekend and bought new blinds in the exact shade specified in the HOA guidelines. It cost her almost $300 to replace all the blinds on the front-facing windows. Money she'd been saving for furniture. She spent an entire Sunday installing them, her hands sore from working with the mounting brackets. At the next HOA meeting, things got even more uncomfortable. There were about 20 residents in the community center room, mostly older homeowners who'd been in the neighborhood for years. Richard stood at the front with his clipboard and his serious expression, going through various agenda items. When he got to the section about violations, he didn't mention any specific addresses, but he made a long speech about certain residents who seemed to think the rules didn't apply to them. He went on about how some people from younger generations didn't understand the importance of maintaining property values, how they expected everyone else to accommodate their lifestyle instead of respecting the community they'd chosen to join. Maya felt every word like a punch. A few people glanced in her direction. Her face burned, but she kept her expression calm. When the meeting opened up for questions, Maya raised her hand. She wanted to ask why the rules seemed to be enforced so strictly on some properties but not others. She'd noticed that the house 3 doors down from her had been leaving their recycling bins out for days at a time and nobody had left them any notes. But before she could even finish her question, Richard interrupted her. If you'd taken the time to read the community guidelines before purchasing property here, you'd understand how enforcement works, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps next time you'll... The room went silent. It was beyond rude. Maya felt humiliated, but she also felt something else. A calm, focused feeling she recognized from years of tournament sparring. When someone tries to throw you off balance, you don't react emotionally. You stay centered. You wait for the right moment. I have read the guidelines, Maya said quietly. All 37 pages. That's why I'm asking about consistent enforcement. Richard's jaw tightened. He clearly didn't like being questioned. The board exercises appropriate discretion in all matters. Meeting adjourned. He gathered his papers and walked out before anyone else could speak. After the meeting, a man named Tom, who lived 2 streets over, approached Maya in the parking lot. He looked to be in his 40s with kind eyes and an apologetic expression. Hey, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about how Richard spoke to you in there, Tom said. He's been like this for years. My wife and I have thought about running for the board just to get him out, but honestly, he makes it so difficult that most people don't want to deal with him. Maya appreciated Tom's words, but it didn't change her situation. She thanked him and drove home feeling defeated. The next week brought another violation notice. This time it was about her trash bins again. According to Richard, the bins needed to be stored in the garage or behind a fence when not in use. Maya didn't have a fence, and her garage was so small that fitting the bins inside meant she could barely fit her car. She looked around the neighborhood. At least 6 other houses had their bins visible from the street, sitting beside their garages or houses. None of them had violation notices taped to their doors. She was starting to understand what Mrs. Wong had meant about families being driven away. This wasn't about maintaining property values. This was about control. Richard enjoyed having power over people, and he especially seemed to enjoy wielding that power over someone he saw as beneath him. Maya started keeping detailed notes. She photographed other properties with similar or worse violations. She documented every interaction with Richard, every letter, every fine. She wasn't sure what she'd do with the information yet, but her instincts told her to be prepared. Meanwhile, life at the dojo was the only thing keeping her sane. Master Lee could tell something was bothering her. During one particularly intense training session, he pulled her aside. Your technique is sharp, but your spirit is troubled, he said in his quiet way. What's happening? Maya told him about the HOA situation, about Richard's constant harassment and how helpless she felt. Master Lee listened carefully, then nodded. A true martial artist faces many battles, and most of them are not physical, he said. Remember what I've taught you. Strength is not about dominating others. It's about protecting what matters. It's about knowing when to act and when to wait. And it's about never allowing fear or anger to control your decisions. His words helped, but they didn't solve her problem. Maya went home that night and found yet another notice on her door. This time Richard claimed her car qualified as a commercial vehicle because she had a small company decal on her bumper. It was just the logo of the software company she worked for, something thousands of employees had on their cars. But according to this new notice, commercial vehicles weren't allowed to park in residential driveways overnight. Maya stood there holding the notice, and for the first time since moving in, she felt tears of frustration building behind her eyes. She'd done everything right, followed every rule, paid every fine, kept quiet and respectful, and it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough for Richard. She had no idea that everything was about to change, and that her years of training were about to become very relevant in a way she'd never expected. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in late October. Maya had just gotten home from teaching her kids karate class at the dojo. She was still wearing her gi, her black belt tied around her waist, planning to change before running some errands. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed a tow truck parked on the street near her townhouse. Her stomach dropped. Richard was standing in her driveway talking to the tow truck driver and pointing at her car. Maya's car. The one that was parked legally in her own driveway. She got out quickly and walked over. Excuse me, what's going on here? Richard turned to her with that expression she'd come to know well. The one that said he was enjoying this. This vehicle is in violation of HOA regulations. Commercial vehicles are not permitted to park in residential driveways. I've called to have it removed. This is my personal car, Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. I work for a software company. Lots of people have company decals on their cars. This isn't a commercial vehicle. The guidelines are clear, Richard said, holding up his clipboard like it was some kind of badge of authority. Any vehicle displaying commercial signage is subject to removal. The tow truck driver looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Maya's car, then at Richard, then at Maya. "Ma'am, is this your vehicle and is it registered to this address?" "Yes, of course it is. I live here. This is my driveway." The driver scratched his head. "Look, I don't usually get involved in HOA disputes, but this seems like a personal car to me. That decal is like 3 inches wide. I've towed actual commercial vehicles, and this ain't it." Richard's face started to turn red. "I'm the HOA president, and I'm telling you this vehicle is in violation. Now either you do your job or I'll call another company and report you for refusing service." Maya felt her heart pounding, but she kept her breathing controlled, just like in sparring. "Stay calm. Don't react emotionally. Richard, this is harassment. You know, this isn't a commercial vehicle. This is my car parked at my home and you have no legal right to have it towed." "Don't tell me what rights I have, little girl," Richard said, stepping closer to her. His voice was rising now. "You've been nothing but a problem since you moved into this community. You don't follow rules. You don't respect authority. You think because you're young and got your parents to help you buy a house that you can just do whatever you want." Maya felt the anger rising in her chest, but years of training helped her push it back down. "I have followed every single rule. I've paid fines for things that shouldn't have even been violations. I've replaced blinds, moved trash cans, and dealt with your constant harassment for 3 months. This needs to stop." Richard moved even closer, invading her personal space. He was a big guy, probably 6 feet tall, and he was using his size to try to intimidate her. He pointed his finger close to her face, not quite touching her, but definitely threatening. "You need to learn your place. This is my community. I've been president here for 6 years, and I don't need some entitled millennial telling me how to do my job." Maya could feel her training kicking in. Her body automatically shifted into a more balanced stance. Her weight distributed evenly. She was aware of everything. Richard's positioning, the tow truck driver taking a step back, Mrs. Wong's front door opening across the street. "Richard, you need to step back," Maya said quietly but firmly. "You're being aggressive and you need to leave my property right now." But Richard wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed more agitated. "I'm not going anywhere until this vehicle is removed. And you know what? I'm going to make sure the board fines you for every single little thing from now on. You want to live here? You're going to follow the rules or you're going to leave like the others did." The tow truck driver held up his hands. "You know what? I'm not towing this car. This is clearly a civil dispute and I'm not getting in the middle of it. Y'all need to work this out through proper channels." He walked back to his truck and started pulling away. Richard looked furious. He yelled after the truck, then turned back to Maya. His face was red, his fist clenched at his sides. "You think you're so smart? You think you can just embarrass me like that?" "I didn't do anything," Maya said. "You're doing this to yourself." That's when Mrs. Wong called out from her porch across the street. "Richard, leave that poor girl alone. She hasn't done anything wrong and everyone in this neighborhood knows it." Several other neighbors had come out now, drawn by the raised voices. Windows were opening. A couple of people had their phones out, though Maya couldn't tell if they were just watching or actually recording. Richard's head snapped toward Mrs. Wong. For a second, Maya thought he might just leave. But instead, he started walking across the street toward the elderly woman's house. His whole body was tense, his movements aggressive. "You need to mind your own business, Patricia," he shouted as he crossed the lawn. "This doesn't concern you." Mrs. Wong stood her ground on her porch, but Maya could see the fear in her eyes. The older woman was in her 70s, maybe 80. She had a cane leaning against the wall beside her. And Richard was storming toward her like he'd completely lost control. Maya didn't think. She just moved. In 3 quick strides, she crossed the street and positioned herself between Richard and Mrs. Wong's porch. Her training had taught her that the best defense is often just proper positioning. Control the space, control the situation. "Richard, stop," Maya said. Her voice was different now, calmer but with an edge of command that came from years of teaching and training. "You need to calm down and walk away." Richard seemed shocked that she'd gotten between him and Mrs. Wong so quickly. For a second, he just stared at her. Then his face twisted with rage. "Get out of my way!" He reached out to push Maya aside, his hand coming toward her shoulder with real force behind it. And that's when everything changed. Maya didn't hit him. She didn't have to. As his hand came toward her, she simply moved. Her body shifted slightly. Her hand came up in a basic redirecting motion she'd practiced 10,000 times, and suddenly Richard's own momentum was working against him. He stumbled forward, completely off balance, and landed on his backside in Mrs. Wong's front lawn. The neighborhood went completely silent. Richard sat on the grass, looking stunned. Maya stood there, her stance relaxed but ready, her expression calm. She hadn't heard him. She'd barely touched him, really. But the message was clear. This quiet young woman was not as helpless as Richard had assumed, and now everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Richard sat on the grass, his face a mixture of shock and embarrassment. For a moment, nobody moved. Maya stood between him and Mrs. Wong's porch, her body language calm but alert. She hadn't struck him. She hadn't hurt him. She'd simply used his own aggressive motion against him, redirecting his energy just like Master Li had taught her years ago. But Richard wasn't the type to accept embarrassment quietly. He scrambled to his feet, his face now bright red with humiliation and rage. Several neighbors had come out of their houses now, and at least 3 people had their phones up, clearly recording. Richard seemed to notice the cameras, which only made him angrier. "You assaulted me," he shouted, pointing at Maya. "Everyone saw it. You put your hands on me." Maya kept her voice steady. "You tried to push me out of your way while you were moving aggressively toward Mrs. Wong. I simply stepped aside. You lost your balance. That's not what happened." Richard was practically yelling now. "You attacked me. This is assault. I'm calling the police." "Good," Mrs. Wong said from her porch, her voice shaking a bit but firm. "Please do call them. I'll tell them exactly what I saw. You came charging at my property, yelling and aggressive. And this young woman protected me, Tom." The neighbor who'd apologized to Maya after the HOA meeting stepped forward from where he'd been watching. "Richard, everyone here saw what happened. You were out of control. She didn't attack you. Maybe you should just go home and cool off." But Richard was beyond reason now. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Maya could hear him speaking to the dispatcher, saying he'd been assaulted by a resident, that he needed officers sent to Riverside Meadows immediately. He gave the address and then stood there, arms crossed, glaring at Maya like he'd already won. Maya felt surprisingly calm. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd defended herself and Mrs. Wong using the minimum force necessary. Actually, it wasn't even force. It was just good technique. She pulled out her own phone and called Master Li. He deserved to know what was happening, and honestly, she could use his steady presence right now. Within 10 minutes, 2 police officers arrived. Richard immediately rushed over to them, talking rapidly and pointing at Maya. The officers listened to him, took some notes, and then walked over to where Maya was standing with Mrs. Wong. The first officer, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes, looked at Maya. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened here?" Maya explained everything calmly. The months of harassment from Richard, the attempted towing of her legally parked car, Richard's aggressive behavior, how he'd charged at Mrs. Wong and she'd simply positioned herself in the way, how he'd tried to push past her and lost his balance when she moved. "She's lying," Richard shouted from where he was standing with the second officer. "She used some kind of martial arts move on me. She's dangerous." The female officer looked at Maya more carefully, noticing for the first time that she was still wearing her karate gi under her jacket. "Do you have martial arts training?" "Yes, ma'am," Maya said. "I've been training in karate since I was 7. I'm a 3rd-degree black belt, and I teach children's classes at Master Li's dojo." The officer nodded slowly. "And did you strike Mr. Thornton in any way?" "No, ma'am. I didn't strike him, kick him, or hurt him in any way. He tried to push past me and I moved. That's all." Tom stepped forward. "Officer, I saw the whole thing." "He's telling it wrong." Richard was being aggressive. He was yelling, getting in her face earlier, and then he started going after Mrs. Wong here. The young lady just got between them. Richard tried to shove her aside and she kind of just sidestepped. He fell on his own. Several other neighbors spoke up, confirming Tom's version of events. A woman named Lisa, who lived 3 doors down, held up her phone. "I got most of it on video if you want to see it." The officers looked at each other. The male officer walked over to his partner, and they spoke quietly for a moment. Then they asked Lisa if they could see the video. She played it for them, and Maya watched as both officers studied the screen carefully. The video showed everything. Richard yelling at Maya, Richard crossing the street toward Mrs. Wong, Maya quickly moving to intercept, Richard reaching out to push Maya, and Maya's smooth, almost graceful movement that left Richard stumbling onto the grass. It was clear from the footage that Maya never struck him, never acted aggressively, and that Richard had essentially knocked himself down. The female officer came back over to Maya. "Ma'am, from what we can see and from the witness statements, you acted in defense of yourself and Mrs. Wong. You didn't use excessive force and, frankly, you showed a lot of restraint. Mr. Thornton was the aggressor here." Richard started protesting loudly, but the male officer held up a hand. "Mr. Thornton, we've reviewed the evidence. Multiple witnesses and video footage show that you were the one acting aggressively. You attempted to have this woman's car illegally towed, you became verbally aggressive, and you advanced on an elderly resident in a threatening manner. If anyone has grounds for charges here, it's these two ladies, not you." "This is ridiculous," Richard sputtered. "I'm the HOA president. I was enforcing community rules." "HOA rules don't give you the right to threaten or intimidate residents," the officer said. "And they certainly don't give you the right to physically advance on people in an aggressive manner. I suggest you go home and calm down. If you continue this behavior, we'll have to consider harassment charges." Richard looked around at all the neighbors watching him. His face was still red, but now it seemed more from embarrassment than anger. He could see it in their expressions. They weren't on his side. Some looked disgusted. Others looked satisfied, like they'd been waiting years to see Richard face consequences for his behavior. Master Lee arrived just as the officers were finishing up. He parked and walked over, his presence calm and dignified in his traditional dojo jacket. He spoke briefly with Maya, who assured him she was fine. Then he turned to the officers. "I'm Master Lee. I've been Maya's instructor for 16 years. I can vouch for her character and her training. She would never use her skills to harm someone. Everything she knows I taught her, and the first thing I teach is respect and restraint." The female officer smiled. "That's clear from what we saw, sir. She handled herself very well." Richard was still standing there looking defeated. The male officer walked over to him one more time. "Mr. Thornton, I'm going to strongly suggest you leave these ladies alone. What we witnessed today, combined with what multiple residents are telling us about your pattern of behavior, could result in formal complaints. Do yourself a favor and back off." Richard didn't say anything. He just turned and walked back to his house, his shoulders slumped. The crowd of neighbors slowly began to disperse, though several came over to check on Maya and Mrs. Wong. Lisa squeezed Maya's hand. "I'm so glad you stood up to him. He's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, and nobody had the courage to do anything about it." Another neighbor, an older man named Harold, shook his head. "I'm ashamed we all let it go on this long. We should have supported you from the start. We should have supported everyone he's bullied." Maya felt overwhelmed by the sudden support. For months she'd felt alone in this. Now suddenly the whole neighborhood seemed to be on her side. Mrs. Wong hugged her gently. "Thank you for protecting me, dear. You're a brave young woman." As the afternoon sun started to set, Maya finally went back to her townhouse. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also relieved. She had no idea what would happen next. But at least now everyone knew the truth about Richard Thornton. The next week felt like living in a completely different neighborhood. Maya woke up Monday morning to find a basket of fresh muffins on her doorstep with a note from Lisa, apologizing for not speaking up sooner. Tuesday, Harold stopped by with some extra tomatoes from his garden. Wednesday, 3 different neighbors smiled and waved as she left for work. It was strange how one moment could change everything, but the real change was happening behind the scenes. Tom had taken the video footage and the witness statements and submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board. Within 2 days, 8 other residents had come forward with their own stories about Richard's behavior. Not just recent stuff, but years of harassment, selective rule enforcement, and bullying tactics that had made people's lives miserable. An emergency board meeting was called for the following Saturday. Maya received an official notice in the mail, but this time it wasn't a violation letter. It was an invitation to attend and share her experience if she felt comfortable doing so. She almost didn't go. Part of her just wanted to move on and forget the whole thing, but Mrs. Wong convinced her otherwise. "If you don't speak up, nothing will change," the older woman said over tea in her living room. "And the next person Richard targets won't have your training or your courage. You can help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." So Maya went to the meeting. The community center was packed. Maya had never seen so many residents at an HOA meeting before. Usually it was just the board members and maybe a handful of homeowners. Today there must have been 50 people crammed into the room. Richard sat at the front table with the other board members, looking smaller somehow. He wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. The board vice president, a woman named Janet, called the meeting to order. She looked uncomfortable but determined. We're here to address serious concerns about HOA management and the conduct of our president. We've received multiple formal complaints, and the board has been reviewing these matters carefully over the past week. For the next hour, residents stood up one by one and shared their stories. A couple who'd been fined repeatedly for their garden decorations, even though their setup was nearly identical to 3 other houses on the street. A single dad who'd been threatened with legal action because his teenage son's car was supposedly parked wrong. A retired veteran who'd been cited for having an American flag that was 2 inches larger than the HOA guidelines allowed. The stories kept coming, painting a clear picture of Richard's abuse of power. Some people cried as they spoke. Others were angry, but everyone was relieved to finally have their voices heard. When it was Maya's turn, she walked to the front and took a deep breath. I'm Maya Chen. I've lived here for 4 months, and in that time I've been cited for violations that nobody else seems to get cited for. I've paid fines for things that shouldn't have been problems. I've dealt with constant harassment and intimidation. And last Saturday, when I tried to protect Mrs. Wong from aggressive behavior, I was accused of assault. She looked around the room at all the faces watching her. I didn't move here looking for trouble. I just wanted a home, a place where I could build a life. And I think everyone here deserves that same thing. A community where the rules are applied fairly, where leaders serve the residents instead of bullying them, and where people feel safe and respected in their own homes. The room broke into applause. Maya felt her eyes getting watery, but she smiled and sat back down. Janet cleared her throat. Thank you, Maya, and thank you to everyone who shared their experiences today. The board has reviewed all the evidence, including video footage from last Saturday's incident, witness statements, and documentation of complaint patterns going back 3 years. We've also discovered some irregularities in the HOA finances that require investigation. Richard's head snapped up at that. What are you talking about? We found discrepancies in the quarterly reports you've been filing, Janet said calmly. Some maintenance fees that were collected but never allocated correctly. Nothing major, but concerning enough that we need to bring in an outside auditor. Richard stood up quickly. This is a witch hunt. You're all turning on me because of one incident with a resident who didn't follow the rules. Richard, sit down, Janet said firmly. The board has voted. Effective immediately, you're removed from your position as HOA president. We're appointing an interim president while we search for new leadership and conduct a full review of HOA operations. The room erupted in applause and some cheers. Richard looked around in disbelief, his face going through several shades of red. For a moment, Maya thought he might start yelling again, but instead he just grabbed his papers and stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind him. Over the next few months, things slowly got better in Riverside Meadows. Janet became the interim president and immediately started working on making the rules more reasonable and consistently enforced. The board created a proper complaint process so residents could report concerns without fear of retaliation, and the financial audit revealed that Richard had been pocketing small amounts from various fees. Nothing huge, but enough to be considered misappropriation of funds. Richard put his house up for sale in December. By February, he was gone. Maya heard through the neighborhood gossip that he'd moved to a condo in another city. She felt a little bad for him, but mostly she just felt relieved. The biggest change, though, was in the community itself. Neighbors who'd barely spoken to each other before started having block parties. People looked out for each other. The atmosphere went from tense and suspicious to actually friendly. One Saturday morning in March, Mrs. Wong knocked on Maya's door with an idea. You know, dear, I was thinking, you teach karate to children, right? What about teaching some classes for us older folks? Nothing too intense, just basic self-defense and exercise. Maya loved the idea. Within a week, she'd organized a free community self-defense class at the neighborhood center. She expected maybe 5 or 6 people. 23 showed up, ranging from teenagers to retirees in their 70s. Mrs. Wong became her most enthusiastic student, showing up twice a week in sweatpants and a determined expression. She couldn't do the high kicks or quick movements, but she learned balance, awareness, and simple defensive techniques. More importantly, she gained confidence. I'm not afraid anymore, Mrs. Wong told Maya after class one day. Not just physically. I'm not afraid to speak up. To use my voice. You taught me that. Maya felt her heart swell. This was why Master Lee had always emphasized that martial arts wasn't about fighting. It was about building character, confidence, and community. The HOA board approached Maya about joining as a regular member, but she politely declined. She didn't want the stress of meetings and rule enforcement. She just wanted to live her life, do her work, teach her classes, and be a good neighbor. But she did agree to join the welcoming committee. Now, whenever new residents moved into Riverside Meadows, Maya was one of the first people to greet them. She'd bring over a small plant and a genuine smile, and she'd make sure they knew they had a friend in the neighborhood. One evening in late spring, Maya sat on her front porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Kids were playing in the street. Neighbors were out walking their dogs and chatting. Mrs. Wong waved from across the way, practicing a front stance she'd learned in class. Maya thought about the day she'd first moved in, nervous and excited and hopeful. She thought about the months of harassment and how isolated she'd felt. And she thought about how everything had changed because she'd finally stood up, not with aggression or anger, but with calm strength and the courage to protect someone who needed help. Her phone buzzed with a text from Master Lee. "How's my star student doing?" Maya smiled and typed back, "Living the lesson. Found my balance." She'd bought this townhouse hoping it would become a home, and now finally it really was. Not because the building had changed, but because she'd found her place in a community that had learned to stand together. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't won with fists. They're won with patience, courage, and the willingness to be the person who steps up when everyone else is afraid to move. Maya took a sip of her tea and watched the neighborhood come alive around her. She was exactly where she belonged.